We have a very distinguished panel, and though I know the hour is late, I'm going to request, as on my right, Mr. Suleman Ghani, who has been former chairman of the Planning and Development Department of the Punjab government. He has been the Secretary Commerce of the government of Pakistan, and he has been at the KP government and etc. in very senior positions, and currently is advising several governments, and particularly with KP. And so I will request him first to make his remarks on the subject.
Thank you, Minister. I think this was an excellent presentation, and of course a lot comes to mind, but since we are talking in the context of where future research should take us, I think I'd like to confine myself to what can possibly be looked at, and perhaps considering that I am working with the provincial governments, there might be this kind of an inadvertent bias in what I have to say, that the research might just focus a little more on the provinces than has happened before, because they now have a much stronger role after the 18th Amendment, and also they have a lot more money after the National Finance Commission awards. Firstly, of course, there was, I think, this excellent analysis of energy usage in terms of its comparisons to the United States, and we all sort of turned up. Are we really depriving high users like industry of the kind of share that they should be getting? And perhaps some kind of a research into whether this distortion really exists might also be helpful. That was the first point that came to mind, and I say this also because it leads me into my second point, which is, of course, what was also mentioned, sustainable discourse, and of course this trend of trying to provincialize discourse. So if you look at that, on one side we say, why don't the provinces step up and now take over these provincial distribution outfits? On the other, you have provinces which are quite willing to invest now in energy generation, especially electricity. We have the KP, which is looking at a lot of hydel generation. The Punjab, I believe, and Sindh are both looking at coal. So what exactly happens? Now, if you're still stuck with the same position that you generate, you are sort of confined, or you are restricted to selling it to WAPTA, and then paying wheeling charges and getting it back to these discos which you now own. I think you're still in a very funny kind of it's not a virtuous circle by any means. So basically, is there a possibility here? Can we look into the possibility of then the province's ability not just to sell to WAPDA, but perhaps also to sell to these discos which have supposedly become independent and which have supposedly now supposedly sustainable. So that's, and I think correlated to that also is the whole question of how the whole business of energy is looked at. And I think that came out very strongly in the presentation, this bias towards rural electrification, towards domestic consumption, towards agriculture at the cost of industry, or more economic use of energy. So when the provinces get into this happy position of having their own electricity, are we going to see this kind of profligacy all over again? Are we going to see tubewells being subsidized, which has happened and continues to happen, in spite of the fact that tubewell owners sell water at a high cost? And so is that going to happen? So, or are we going to now look at owners or distributors or owners of energy becoming more efficient in terms of how they use it, and move away from, because these are political governments, and as was again pointed out, there are huge black areas out there, especially if you look at Balochistan and you look at the KP. And these black areas on a per capita basis now will be serviced at a much higher cost, because they are at considerably more distance from the grid. So what is going to happen? Is a lot of it going to go into getting this nice feel of supplying people with electricity? And I'm not saying people need not be supplied with electricity, but perhaps there are alternate ways of doing that. Of course, the easiest to do is to just keep extending the national grid and sort of making it much more inefficient. So that was the other thing which came to mind, that perhaps that could be one area that needed looking into. I have always also been concerned about how we cost energy. how we charge people for energy. And I don't know, I'm no energy expert, though I must confess that a long time back I was Secretary Energy Punjab for a while, but that still doesn't make me an expert. But I honestly feel that you really cannot get anywhere if you get natural gas cheaper than you get a unit of gasoline or a unit of diesel. So how are you going to rationalize the energy usage unless you really start looking at costing it right? Which you might use the British thermal unit, I don't know, whatever unit you use, but every unit of energy must cost you the same. And until you do that, I really don't see any rationalization in usages coming around. So that I think again is something. I mean, I don't see any one part of the energy spectrum becoming sustainable unless you address the whole. You've got to take a look at electricity or whatever in the cost of every unit of electricity. This is the other point which might need looking into, and perhaps a little bit of research is, we all talk about the distortion in tariffs. There is a bias towards domestic consumption, there's a bias towards agriculture. The question is, how much is it really hurting? Until you have empirical evidence to show how much the hurt is in terms of economic losses, I don't think policy makers are going to be able to convince the political decision makers on the need to do something really dramatic or drastic about it. That was one more point which came to mind. I think a very good point that was made was demand-side management, which is something which has been very weak, at least in Pakistan. And there, of course, I personally think that it's about time we got going. We don't really even have decent conservation plans for our units of government. Districts, for example, every district should have a conservation plan. I remember in the time when I was Secretary of Energy, and we did an audit of government connections and found out that 40% of the Punjab government connections, which the Punjab government was paying for, were not actually needed, and they were being used to really give free energy to people. So perhaps it's time that countries seriously started thinking about solid district-based, locally based conservation plans vis-a-vis energy, which is something we need to do. And of course, finally, a point which always really sort of rankles with me are all these entitlements that we've created. There are a whole host of government functionaries and others who are entitled to having their electricity and their gas bills paid. I don't mind a facility being extended, but this is the most inefficient facility that you can think of, because this promotes inefficient usages. It's be far better to convert it into a monetary value and give that kind of an incentive. And I could again quote you examples on this, in a sense that for a long time, the government was paying for SCARP tube wells, electricity, without any kind of an audit. And again, when I was Secretary of Energy, and irrigation. Actually, since I was holding both the portfolios, I could do this. I had an audit done of the tube wells, thousands of them, and discovered that they were they were old tube wells. None of them could run. The best tube well was running at a capacity of 33%, and the bills were for 100% usage. And in 1 year, WAPDA was charging the government of Punjab 2 billion rupees when the actual charges should have been 800 million. So frankly, I think this whole business of just having entitlements rather than confining them to some kind of a monetary benefit is another area which perhaps could need looking into. Some research would help. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very thought-provoking remarks, and I'm sure the researchers will be listening and thinking of how to address some of these issues. Next, I would like to ask Dr. Arvind Mayaram, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry, the Government of India, to provide some comment from the Indian perspective in terms of the energy priorities.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to first share some figures, I think, which was mentioned there about the per capita consumption comparison with the US. I think what is important is also for us to see how we are progressing in providing energy access to people. The World Bank report, very recent report says that in 2009 in India, the connectivity for people, 66.3% of the population had access to energy. In 2010, it went up to 75%. In Bangladesh, it was 41%, went up to 46.5. In Pakistan, 62.4, went up to 67.4. Nepal, it went up from 43.6 to 76.3. This is because of the large number of hydel power projects which were in the pipeline and got completed around the same time. Of course, Sri Lanka remained at 76.6 over that period of between 2009 and 2010. So obviously, a huge amount of effort is going in connecting people or providing access to the people. But I would like to also mention the fact that the energy requirements are becoming exponentially higher. For an economy like India, for instance, when it was growing almost at 8.5%, we've come to around less than 5 now, but we expect in the next 2 years to start moving up again. We are now below the poverty line. So the question is, when you move towards market-driven prices, as you have said that you need to do, and everyone believes it is true, then we need to look at the affordability of power. You can provide access, but can people afford it? And how do you create that affordability for those who are so poor? I mean, 250 or 270 million is not a small number, and I'm only talking of India in that manner. So I think that would be a very critical area to look at that. I also believe that there is need to have a very close look on improving the design of electricity regulatory authority. How do we create a better designed regulatory authorities? In India, 2003, the Electricity Act did provide for creation of independent regulators and with independent authority, but we have seen they haven't really worked very well. And so how do we create a really good regulator? And also, how do we create capacities in regulatory system? Because in India, this is something we are now grappling with, the major problem of capacity in the regulatory authorities to be able to deal with very complex issues of pricing and issues of that nature. One other area which I believe is going to be very important is the area of green energy. In India, for instance, we have increased within a period of 3 years the total installed capacity of solar power from 30 megawatt to more than 2000 megawatt. And the target under the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission is to reach a capacity of 20 gigawatt by 2022. Now, if that is so, then we'll need a lot of new research which will go in management of microgrids, which are created around solar power, and also the economies of microgrid. How do you create the economies in microgrid so that they become commercially viable or commercially profitable for private sector investment to go into those areas? So that certainly would be an area of great interest to us. Finally, one area which I believe is of great importance to South Asia, but it is global in nature, is the work that needs to go in better designing the global architecture for financing of green energy, where I think it is completely inequitable, and where the manner in which it is has been designed is not really giving any much of a benefit to the developing countries. So whereas there is a lot of pressure from the developed countries to move towards green energy and accept obligations, there is very little obligation that the developed countries are taking, and there needs to be some more research in this area for policymakers to be more informed, to be able to have much better bargaining position with the global community on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was very informative and perceptive comments. And next, I would like to request Dr. Minhaj Mahmud, Head Research Institute of Governance Studies and BRAC Development Institute, Bangladesh, to provide some comments from the perspective of Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not an energy expert, to confess, and not even in the context of Bangladesh, but I'm a researcher who has interest in the issue. So before, I would like to thank Professor Arvind Burgess for neatly summarizing the issue regarding energy and particularly electricity, which is very relevant for the countries in this region, South Asian region. Looking at Bangladesh's perspective, Bangladesh has experienced a rapid rise in energy consumption as its per capita income has been growing over the last decade, and we are expecting to enter even a higher consumption phase in the years to come, and supply has to keep up so that growth momentum is also kept. Two things relevant here. So the government of Bangladesh has in its 2021 vision in its planning document has committed to provide electricity at an affordable price and also reliable electricity by the year 2021, but still half of our population is without access to reliable, not even reliable but electricity, but we have no good access to electricity. So in the recent years, on top of that, in the recent years, to government has taken up comprehensive strategy to improve the situation, both exploring supply side options and also focusing on demand management. The recent thing that has been adopted since 2009 is a plan that government taken is called quick rental plan thing, that government buys electricity from the private sector, whereby government supplies the fuel for electricity production as liquid fuel, furnace oil and diesel things. So the cost of electricity production will be going up. Since independence in Bangladesh, the energy subsidy has been a big issue, that giving energy subsidy is even at the moment more than 4% of the GDP. So inform policy, government policy, and guide the government to its effort towards this comprehensive strategy. Some of the research that should be given priority, I think, is we can look into both demand side and supply side issues. So because our power pricing has not been based on some good research, so how should we price power based on different fuel system? So that is a question, whether the pricing at the moment is optimal. That can be investigated. And demand side issues, management issues, as pointed out by Professor Robin, is very relevant also in our context. So we can look into energy savings, transmission and distribution efficiencies, to look into these issues, and discriminating price in different sectors. So what would be the optimal thing there? And also a debate also in our country is to use coal-based power generation. So what is the prospect of local domestic coal-based power generation, and also use import versus imports, that's thing also. And also here it was pointed out the green energy thing, so renewable energy, that's another option. There also we need to, we have options like solar panel is also in Bangladesh providing off-grid electricity, and biogas is an option. But both on demand and supply side, for using renewable energy, we need to focus on doing research more. That's it. I would like to highlight these points, and I thank you again. Thanks to IGC for giving me this opportunity to be among these distinguished panels. Actually, it's a privilege. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmud. Finally, I would like to request Mr. Jahan Zeb Khan, who is Secretary Finance, Government of Punjab, but he's also at the moment heading the Energy Initiative in Punjab. So, some thoughts on what should be the research priorities for IGC in Punjab and Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll briefly apprise you also. I don't think I'll go to the presentation. I think a lot have been said, so I'll just confine myself to a couple of points. I did have an opportunity to speak at the plenary, so I won't go into the problem that we have, and I'm sure everybody here is aware of it. I'll just mention briefly what we're trying to do, and let me start from the demand management side, because clearly there are quick gains there. It takes longer period to generate, but it's much easier to manage the demand. Not easier, but quicker, perhaps. We've recently been in serious dialogue with the stakeholders on seeing how we can achieve energy efficiency and using electricity. And the International Finance Corporation has been helping us in this dialogue. So we've concluded a session with the stakeholders, and they participated very enthusiastically in this. Out of that, we are bringing out a program which is going to be a 5-year program for energy conservation and efficiency in the Punjab. And this would be funded from the provincial resources. We would have several projects under this in various sectors: agriculture, the industrial sector, for households, for public buildings. And it is our intention to help each one of these to achieve energy efficiency in the way they are operating now, by an incentive regime, by actually helping with financing some of the products, using banks as a conduit perhaps. And so there would be several aspects to this apart from the legislative and the policy side, but we want to really help work them through this. And there are huge gains. I have some of the numbers. If I may just flip to my presentation on that. We have worked out that in lights we have quick gains of about 30 to 35% saving only in lights. Fan about 20%. Some estimates say that fans, the saving could be as much as 1,000 megawatt. And same goes for the industrial consumption in boilers, very inefficient boilers that are being used. The motors that are being used not only in the industry but also for pumping water in households and municipalities, and the tube wells. All this is well known. So there are very quick gains that we might have here. And this would go alongside the conservation effort. That in itself is an important area. I think this would be an interesting area for the researchers to see where should we invest first, because the priorities are of such wide variety. If we were to invest public funds in this, where is the biggest bang for the buck? And I think that would help us prioritize our investment on the demand management side. Now, I would like to just present, I would say there are 5 P's that would define the situation, which is the power sector itself. And a larger question of how is it seen? Is it a public good? And if it's a public good, then what is the pricing for that good? Because so that is a serious issue. We still have substantial subsidies for the lifeline consumers and also for agriculture consumers, for instance. But so the pricing policy and then the payment mechanism. So that's another P that we have. And what is the payoff? How much should be served through the grid? Where do we get into distributed generation? And what kind of, we are also experimenting now with captive power production and private to private sale. Next door, we were in a session since yesterday trying to figure out what kind of legal framework is required to help facilitate this. Again, these are issues where we'd like to see what options the government has, what kind of regulatory requirements are necessary, and what mechanisms can be put in place to look at the trade-offs. We also have a serious issue on the side of fuel. What kind of fuel should we use? And the historical sense has been the oil pricing, how it is behaving also in the international market, and whether if we transit to coal now, which we have not done in the past. We virtually have less than 1% of coal power production, which is not what globally is the case. So we have been heavily reliant on the furnace oil, and with the price having gone up, it is now a heavy burden on the exchequer. So while we're trying to go to coal, in the medium run, we're looking at imported coal, which again has a cost, but is substantially lesser than the imported furnace oil. And then there's this debate on whether we can use the indigenous coal and at what price. What kind of externalities does it pose in terms of its quality, its sulfur content, and the pollution that it can cause, and how much calorific value it has. So what kind of impact it has on the tariff. So where are the trade-offs? Shall we move towards imported coal or stay with domestic coal? And these are very live questions that we face these days, and a bit hard also to address in the absence of credible research. Then on the side of, there's also excitement about using indigenous fuels such as biomass and solar, and then also we're talking about biogas and then some advanced technologies. The implication for tariffs and the implications for various consumers are important. These are interesting areas for researchers, so how they would look at these fuels, and what kind of a fuel mix do we need to achieve when the global energy market is so volatile. With new developments such as that of shale gas, how would it impact on oil prices, and what would be the consistency of policies on coal? We see a shift globally, but how effective would it be, because the base load still in most of the bigger economies such as US, India is on coal, and these economies are very substantial. So Pakistan would have to take difficult choices in this, and we would be benefited from research on how we can proceed. My last comment is that this is such a huge issue right now with us that it's very difficult to tell the policymakers that we'll have to wait for research to be conducted. The choice has to be done now, and it's literally done on the back of the envelope, making calculations as people are suggesting with new thought processes. So how can we quickly assemble what has been done and give intelligent choices? Because doing original research here would take some time, and the action is being done now. You might be aware that there are big plans to go down the route of establishing imported coal power plants both on the coast and in the Punjab, and there's another research question here: how much transportation cost does affect the tariff from the coast to the inland power plants, and how is it this offset by the transmission losses? Because there's this debate again that whether we should install these plants on the coast or inland, and the cost of transportation may be more or less the same as the distribution losses that may occur because of the long distance of transmission. So it's a policy action research which is required, and I think if the Growth Center can give some quick advice on the basis of what they've seen elsewhere, they might be contributing to some decisions which have long-term implications. I thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. Now, while there's very little time, but what I'm going to do is maybe 10 minutes for comments, priorities for research from the floor. So first, I'll acknowledge Mr. Gupta.
Just one question. We have been hearing for a long time that there is going to be some sort of a energy pipeline from East Asia, Central Asia via Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. But now we are not hearing about it. Any development on that front?
Much. Would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, but I think there's still work going on that. So that's a short answer.
I think the federal government is more involved in that, so maybe one could, but we will keep that on record and maybe have somebody give you an answer. Please, could you just...
Thank you. I'm Shakil from UNDP. I think for the research, and I think one of the issues which is quite relevant to the context of Pakistan is to see the inefficiencies in the of the institutions to recover bills. I mean, you can have incentives for people to pay, but there are people who are paying their bills, and every time you increases the prices. And what is happening, and some of the people think that you are passing on, the institution is passing on the cost of inefficiencies, of their own efficiencies, to the people who are already paying. And we also know that there are cities, there are geographical areas who kind of very famous for stealing electricity. And I don't think that you would need a bit of hi-fi technology for that. So my thing is and we all know that perhaps the systemic kind of losses is account for 30 or 35% of the kind of and that is the cost of inefficiencies. So perhaps one should also look into this issue, how can we improve the efficiency of the institution to recover bills. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we are identifying research priorities, I'm not going to ask the panelists to respond to any of this. They just can take some notes and the researchers can. Anyone else who may want to make a comment here? Surjit, you have a comment? No. Okay. Anyone else? Please, can you turn the light off so we can see if there's anybody else? I think since there's nobody here who wants further comments, so what I want to conclude by thanking the speaker, Dr. Robin Burgess, and the distinguished panelists for this session. And as this is the last session of this conference, I would like to take this opportunity also to thank, I think there were 2 persons missing from the country team at that time who've been responsible for organizing it, so I just want to acknowledge those. There's Hina Sheikh is back, so if she, and Ms. Alishba Khwaja, who is our office manager, she has been... And I would like to conclude also by thanking, on behalf of the IGC country team, all the participants who have made this conference such a success. So maybe we can all give ourselves a hand. And I would particularly like to thank the participants who came from India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, UK, USA, and many other countries. We really appreciate this. So thank you very much. I want to say to them, I hope you enjoyed your stay here. And if you are not leaving tomorrow, I hope you'll take this opportunity to maybe see a bit of the city. And I hope you will come back, that you have enjoyed both the research agenda, the discussions, as well as being in Pakistan and Lahore sufficiently to bring you back soon, though some people had said they're back after 19 years or 10 years, so I hope next time will be sooner, and I wish you a safe journey back home. Thank you very much.